You've got it on 20th Century Classics. I'm Tom Taylor, and in a moment I'll be talking with Twila Paris. She's released 22 albums and has had 33 number one hits. She's won numerous Dove Awards, and she's sold more than 1.3 million albums. She continues her work as an independent recording artist, and she balances her career and being a homeschooling mom. It's an honor to have her on the program today, and without any further delay, here's our conversation. So where did you grow up, and what was your background growing up?
Well, I was born in Texas, and my parents were living there at the time. And when I was about 6, we moved to Northwest Arkansas, in a town called Springdale. And Northwest Arkansas is where I still live with my husband and son, and I'm very blessed in that all of my siblings live really close to us. My mom is still living. We're all within about 3 minutes of one another. So the cousins get to hang out together a lot, and it's just, I don't ever want to take it for granted because I know a lot of families are spread all over the country.
Oh, yeah.
Or even farther than that. So Northwest Arkansas is where we still are.
So what music did you listen to when you were growing up?
Oh, my goodness. People who have listened to my music over a lot of years probably already know that I have many influences because you can hear all of that.
Oh, yeah.
Various songs at various times. But I grew up, in the church, and so singing all the church songs, hymns, as I got a little bit older, worship choruses, scripture choruses, as we called them in those days. It was way before modern worship. Those started coming along. And because we lived in the South, there was Southern gospel.
Yeah.
And so we would literally go and hear the Southern gospel quartets. And then my family was very musical. My dad, in addition to being a minister, had also a degree in music, in particular piano. And so we listened to a lot of classical music.
Yeah.
And then when I was about, I want to say it was about 13, and this amazing song came on the radio. And I went out and got the 45, and it was by a guy named Andre Crouch.
Oh, yeah.
Called I've Got Confidence. And I think that was the very, very first, quote, contemporary Christian song I ever heard.
Wow.
And then people like Dallas Home and Second Chapter of Acts and the Imperials started coming along. And so I just, and as well as, just what was on the radio in general in those days, everything from John Denver to Olivia Newton-John.
Oh, yeah.
I just devoured, the contemporary Christian music, and, it wasn't long before I started thinking, wow, I would maybe like to do that someday. I wonder if that would be something a way that God would, want to use me, or something that I could, have the privilege of doing. And so,
oh, yeah.
Started thinking along those lines a little bit, probably by the time I was 16, 17, So, but it was an amazing time to be listening to music because there was just this brand new baby, form of music that had never existed before.
Oh, yeah.
I got to be around for that.
Yeah, that's neat. I wish I were around at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seriously dating myself now, right?
Yeah, I read that you released your first album called Little Twila Paris back in 1965.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. How did that come about, and how was that received at the time?
My dad, I mentioned that he was a minister and also a musician.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I would have been, when we actually recorded that, I believe I was 4. And so my dad was an evangelist, which in those days, we would travel from one, spend usually a couple of weeks at one church. And there would be a revival, which is, a different definition than what we think of as a revival now, which is, God the Spirit of God moving on people's hearts. And that's where the name came from. That's what they were hoping for. But they also called it a revival if you had church every night for 2 weeks and a guest preacher would come in and preach a revival. So, I never really hear about that anymore, maybe once in a while. But, so Dad was an evangelist, and he would preach. So I was literally in church, not just 3 times a week, like some people say, but every night.
Oh, really?
Because we'd be in a new church 2 weeks later, another church, and so he would be preaching every night, so we were in church every night. So, I think I was about 2 years old when somehow a pastor's wife asked me to sing a song in Sunday school. I don't know why, but she did, and so I did. And so then she said, hey, would you like to sing that in big church? So, they put me in front of the microphone and stood me on a chair, and I sang Jesus Loves Me in big church. So then, Dad said, well, would you like to start doing that? Because he would sing, he would preach and also sing. He was a songwriter as well, and wrote actually wonderful songs that would have been called contemporary Christian music in his time, if such a thing had existed.
Oh, yeah.
But he was a little bit before, a whole generation before his time. But, and anyway, he's the person, though, that I've always said who taught me how to love God and how to write a song. So, but anyway, so by a couple of years later, I was singing every night, everywhere we went, and Dad had recorded a custom or an independent album to make music available, for the people who were there in the services. And he asked me if I'd like to record one, too. And it was very simple. We went to a recording studio, and every song was either Dad playing the piano or the organ and me singing. That was it.
Oh, okay.
And so, so we literally, pretty much did the whole thing in one day. And so, I had an album when I was 4 years old.
Yeah, I never knew that.
It's something that one time I was doing an interview somewhere. I think it might have been at Moody, and a lady called in, live, and said, "Hey, I have the album you recorded when you were 4." And I had a couple of people were there with me from the record company. I could see them sort of through the glass window as I was in there in the control room doing the interview. And so the guy who's hosting the interview says, "Well, wonderful. Do you have something to play it on?" Well, amazingly, she did, because that was probably in the 1990s at that point. I was like, really? You have something to play a record on?
Yeah.
And so she plays it and holds the phone up to it. So he's playing it on the radio, from her playing it from her little whatever stereo over the phone.
Huh.
And so me singing at 4 years old, and I look out there through the glass, and I see the folks, I guess maybe one from the record company, one from my management company. They start kind of giggling, and then pretty soon they're just convulsing with laughter, and then they just disappear. It's like they're just on the floor laughing. So, yes, in other words, it's, of course, we think it's cute, but
yeah.
I think people like to use it to mock me sometimes, too.
Yeah, I was actually looking to see if I could find a sample of it to use on my program.
You know what? I don't know that there is anything online, and that's probably one of those things that over the years, we thought, we should probably do that, but have never gotten around to.
The only thing I found was on Amazon, and it was like $85 for an old
like somebody
copy.
Had a copy and they were selling it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we should get that online sometime. That's a good idea. We'll try to do that.
How about your testimony? Would you mind sharing that with us and how you came to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior?
Well, interestingly enough, and it's funny that because nobody in all the years ever asked me those two questions back to back, so I never thought about this. But I came to the Lord when I was 4 years old, which is the same year I made my first album. I never thought about that. But, my dad being an evangelist, every night, he would give an altar call. He would ask people if they wanted to invite Jesus into their heart. And one night at 4 years old, I was sitting there listening every night, and one night I walked down front and prayed and asked Jesus to come into my heart, and I was very sincere, and I believe that God takes those childhood prayers very seriously.
Oh, yeah.
But, so I got saved when I was 4. But, by the time I was, I'd say I was about 17, 18, I started realizing that, you add a lot of dimensions to your life between 4 and 18, right?
Oh, yeah.
Things like ambition, for example. And, I was always, everybody thought of me as a good kid, and I wasn't out doing crazy, doing crazy stuff. I was, obeying my parents and getting good grades in school and all that. But I started realizing at around 18 years old, I have all these new dimensions in my life, and I haven't been submitting those to the Lord. I've just been kind of cruising along here doing, what I think I'm supposed to be doing, but never had really come to that moment of saying, hey, what about ambition, for example? And, have I laid all that at the feet of Jesus and said, please reveal to me what you'd like me to do? Or am I saying, hey, this is what sounds really cool and fun to me, and I'm hoping you can sign off on that and help make it happen? It's, And so that was a real sort of a crossroads for me of coming to that place of realizing, that I needed to say that, Lord, hey, I have this desire in my heart, for example, to do Christian music. I mean, I still wanted to do Christian music, and yet I just, I really needed the Lord to search my heart and, motivations, all of those sorts of things. Who was I doing it for? Why was I doing it? What was it about? What was the point,
Yeah.
So I came to the place of just saying to the Lord, hey, if you want to send me to Africa to wash dishes, for the rest of my life, I want you to show me what is, step by step, lead me in the way that you want me, that I can best serve and glorify you. Well, oddly enough, as I guess often happens, it was, not really that much long. God was doing just really major heart surgery, spiritual heart surgery,
Yeah.
In my life over the next couple of years. And during that time, as a response, because I was a musician and I loved songs, and I hadn't really been writing, but as a way of expressing what God was doing in my heart, I just naturally began to write songs. That became the outlet.
Ah.
And so then there was a point a couple of years later where my dad came to me and said, I really think, I'd play them sometimes in various settings, when somebody would ask me to, or I'd have the opportunity, just, small settings. And my dad said, I think you need to, pray about making an independent album, recording some of these songs to make them available to people.
Yeah.
And so, it really was one of those things of you lay your dream, down before the Lord, and, he begins to resurrect it, and you realize, oh, that was a dream that he placed in my heart, and that was his dream for me as well, but I had contaminated it with my own, motivations and ambitions, as we were talking about. And some of that stuff, needed to fall by the wayside so that it could be used by him in the pure form that he desired. So that's sort of, I guess, testimony and story sort of rolled into one there. But it's all kind of part of the, for so many of us, is the, all the same process.
Continuing with that, you released your first contemporary Christian album when you were 19. Is that right?
No, I'd say that I recorded it at 20. I was probably 21, right at 21, when it actually released.
Okay.
So.
And so what events led to that big break and signing with Benson Records?
Well, and at the time it wasn't Benson. It is now, with all the, buying and selling.
Oh, yeah.
Record labels and all that. But I guess it was, shortly after it was recorded and before it actually released, because it actually did release on that label, and that label at the time was called Milk and Honey.
Oh, really?
And so my mom and dad, and it was actually part of Zondervan Corporation at the time. They had music, and so anyway, later on that all ended up being purchased by Benson. But so I'm home with my 3 younger siblings, and because my mom and dad are on a missions trip in Thailand, I think it was. And so I get a I get a phone call out of the blue, and I think the guy who produced that album had sent a copy to, I don't know if he sent it to a couple of labels or just to this one. But anyway, it just so happened it was a fairly new label that was, a division of Zondervan. They were looking for new artists at the time because they were starting up their label. And so they listened to this, probably it was a cassette that he sent them.
Yeah.
And so they call out of the blue, and I answer the phone, and she says, "Is this Twila?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Well, this is so-and-so from Milk and Honey Records, and I'm calling because we want to sign you to our label, and we were wondering if you could be in Dallas next week for CBA, for Christian Booksellers Convention." And, I'd gone to CBA before. I knew what that was because my parents had owned a Christian bookstore when I grew up, and we used to go because of that to CBA. So I said, "Well, I don't know. I mean, my parents are in Thailand. I have to talk to my dad." So anyway, long story short, we managed to kind of pull it all together and pray about it quickly, and I did. I signed with that label, and I was in Dallas next week for CBA. And it's kind of funny because you talk about it being a big break, and it really is, because it gives you an opportunity to, but what I used to say was, I thought, wow, well, this is it, cool, But later on, years later, I said, oh, that was my permission to start working. And so anyway, I think at the time, I'm not even sure if they had anyone who, they were so new. I don't think they had anyone who sent music out to Christian radio. So all that was sort of developing as we went. So I thought those things all happened magically, and it took some time for those things to start, coming to pass. But I think that was good. I think it was very good for me. Sometimes because everything is so up and running and established, or has been for a lot of years now in Christian music, sometimes new artists, they kind of are sort of all of a sudden, boom, everybody knows their name.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how well I would have handled that, So I think the Lord knows, exactly what journey and how many twists and turns, to lead all of us on.
Yeah, you're able to grow kind of along with the label in a way.
Exactly. So it was. It felt gradual to me, It was my second album, I think, before a song or two got played on the radio. I think it was the third album was The Warrior's Child, and I think it was that particular song, I think, was the first song to ever go to number one. So I've been doing this at that point for several years, so it wasn't just like everything just sort of happened overnight. And I think it helps you not to take God's blessings and His favor for granted, So, which I hope you never do. That's something I've been thinking about lately, because we all have challenges and tests and trials as we go along, right?
Yeah.
And it can be so tempting, especially when the bigger ones come along, to focus on those, and a little air goes out of our balloon,
Yeah.
And I just have been reminded so much lately that, to focus on God's goodness and His blessings and His protection. They're always there. And we can get so tempted to take those things for granted. And even in the difficult times, His faithfulness is underneath and around everything, and underneath and around us. And, for many years now, Romans 8:28 has been such a theme, that all things really do. That used to be just kind of a verse I knew, and the older I get and the more life I live and the more I observe the lives of other people around me, the more I realize that the truth of that principle, that you can just see it, And then sometimes it takes a while. It takes some patience. But really, God is always working everything, even the difficult things and the things we never would have chosen, for our good and for His glory.
Yeah, I'm actually an independent Christian artist myself, so
Oh.
I know about the patience that it takes and the waiting involved, and I've been at it for about 10 years, and I kind of put success in my mind before everything else at times, and kind of lost focus, and I even ended up signing with a label that I shouldn't have signed with, and made some mistakes. So I definitely know what you're saying. So yeah.
You know, my dad used to say, and it's something we repeat, you know, from time to time, God's faithfulness, he would say that this as the definition of success, okay? God's faithfulness plus my faithfulness equals success.
Yeah.
Well, at first when you hear that, you think, oh, that's just saying that if you'll be faithful, you'll be successful. No, what he's saying is that's the definition of success. In other words, what's the one variable in that equation? My faithfulness, right?
Yeah.
God is always faithful. So if I am listening and I'm being obedient, if I'm being faithful, that is success.
Yeah.
That is, even if the world wouldn't look and define it as success, it is success in God's eyes.
Right.
So that's so freeing. That's so liberating, isn't it? And encouraging.
Yeah.
If I'm being faithful, I'm being successful.
Well, one of my personal favorite songs of yours is actually "God Is in Control." And that song actually, it's personally for me, I mean, it comes into my head like at certain times when I need to be reminded of that fact that he is indeed in control. So can you talk about that song and what it has meant to you personally?
Well, I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head what year that song was written. I want to say something like in the early half of the 90s. I think by the time it was recorded, it was probably 90. Well, I'm not going to start. I'm not trying to guess. Somewhere in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And the inspiration for that song was, believe it or not, way back then, I was looking around. I was looking at what was going on in the world, what was going on in our nation, and it was worrisome to me.
Yeah.
I didn't like a lot of what I was seeing. It was like, what's happening to my beautiful country? And at the time, I lived about 30 minutes away from my mom. And she was out in the country and I was in town. So one day, got in the car and I was driving out to my mom's house. And I was just thinking about a lot of these things, being tempted to get a little bit worried, a little bit unnerved. And, I just felt the Spirit of the Lord speaking to me, just saying, hey, I've got this.
Yeah.
And I do still have, the ultimate authority here. I am still the bottom line. And yes, they have free will, but at the end of the day, I'm in charge. And I just started singing, as I was driving along the car, God is in control. We believe that his children will not be forsaken. And by the time I got to my mom's house, the chorus was written. I've been just singing that all the way out there, just in the car with no music, no piano. And then later on, when I got home, sat down at the piano and sort of fleshed out the chords and wrote verses and et cetera. And then, we recorded it on the next project, which I believe was Beyond a Dream. So, and, now, I keep having these recurring, moments, in the last decade or so where I would just think, oh, that song feels... I actually did a little project where I recorded a couple of patriotic songs, the national hymn and America the Beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
And then just pulled songs of mine from over the years that I felt lent themselves to, as a Christian and a patriot, how do we think? How do we live? How do we speak into, the world around us? And just sort of as an encouragement, for because it felt like, songs like God is in Control, I was like, my goodness, if I thought this was timely back in the 90s, we really need to be reminded of this now.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? So I wrote the song thinking about the macro, what's going on in the big world around me. That's what was in my mind. But, immediately I started hearing back from people and getting letters from people saying, oh, God really spoke to me through this song when I was, diagnosed with this, with cancer, or when my child was going through this situation, or my family, and people were applying it in very personal ways. And I was like, oh, yeah, of course, And that's happened to me so much over the years, where I would write a song and I'd be thinking of it in a particular way, and I'd be a little bit limited in my scope of understanding what the song was about.
Yeah.
And then I'd start hearing from other people and how they were understanding it and applying it, and I'd be like, oh my goodness, yeah, I didn't think of that. And so it's just another one of those many humbling things,
Oh, yeah.
And it lets you know, those songs I really believe that not only the ability to write a song, but each song is a gift from the Lord.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And I just, that is one of the ways that I'm reminded that the song just comes through me, because, more often than not, I don't even fully comprehend it.
Yeah,
I realize later,
Yeah. I understand that after being married for about 15 years or so, that you and your husband Jack still had no children. And would you mind sharing about that and about your son JP?
Well, yes, it was there's something around that whole story that is really amazing to me still. But it just so happened that, by the time we'd been married 15 years, I'd kind of gone through the whole process of, just laying that down and saying, Lord, whatever your will is, and who knows if it's even a good idea at this point, given how old we are. And don't want to be selfish in this request or anything like that. And I had just come to the point of saying, and I'm grateful, God, for all these spiritual children that you've given me, and that's enough. If that's, whatever your will is. So I'd kind of gone through that whole process, and over the years, I had written, from time to time, I would write something that I would think, that seems a little bit more like something for a children's album. And I would just tuck it away and say, someday I'll do something for children.
Yeah.
And it was right around this time that we decided, actually, let's do a lullaby album. So I pulled out these things that I've been saving over the years, and then I began to write with that in mind, writing, intentionally writing lullabies. And, from my perspective, I was writing lullabies for other people's children.
Yeah.
And so, and at the same time, I was really still praying. Even at that moment in time, I was just praying. I wasn't praying, Lord, please give us a baby. I was praying, Lord, please do what you know is best for everyone involved. That's what I was praying. And I'm writing these lullabies for other people's kids. And I wasn't like, oh, this is kind of bittersweet. I'm writing lullabies for other people's kids. It really wasn't like that. It was like I enjoyed the process of writing those songs as much or more than any other project I ever wrote for. For some reason, I just loved writing those songs. I was really enjoying it, even though it wasn't, even though I was thinking, these are for babies out there.
Yeah.
And so I got everything recorded. I sent it off to the record company, to the producer, so people could give their input on, which songs and et cetera. And literally, 1 month later, I found out that we were expecting a baby.
Wow.
Which means that pretty much at the moment of sending off that tape, I was, or whatever the recording, it wasn't, whatever kind of recording it was. I don't remember all the different kinds of recordings and moments in time, but
Yeah.
But I just was like, wow, it was one of those moments when God does something in a particular way that this always just, it always just slays me,
Yeah.
When God does this thing of singling somebody out, and to me, this is how I describe this. Like, God goes way out of his way to make a point that you can't possibly miss of how much he loves you
Yeah.
and how involved he is in your life.
Mm.
And that just, it just felt like one of those moments, how faithful he is, and how much he wants you to know that. And so when, at the moment, these things move slowly. So at the moment when I was actually finally recording the vocals for that project that was turned out to be called Bedtime Prayers. So at the moment that I was recording those vocals, I was 6 months pregnant. And, for those who haven't been, in a studio, generally when you're recording vocals, you're in a room that's soundproof, and you're listening to the music on headphones.
Yeah.
And so you're singing, into the mic, that's so that it can all be sorted out in the mix, it's on separate channels. And so for a baby, who's growing in the womb, would be hearing just his mother's voice singing those songs and nothing else.
And it turned out that you had actually been writing songs for your own child all along also. Not
for
just
him also.
not just for other people's children. Yeah. Yeah, and that's an encouragement to people out there that are waiting to have children as well.
Yeah, and you know what? That's the way my story turned out. But I think an important part of that story is being able to say, Lord, to pray, Lord, please do what you know is best.
Yeah.
Because I think we can sometimes, when we focus in on a particular dream and we aren't able to say, Lord, please, your will be done.
Yeah.
We can really torment ourselves, not because God doesn't want what's best for us, because he does, and he does what's best for us. But sometimes we can't see it. And so if we insist on clinging to what we can see, to our vision, and not letting go and saying, God, I want your dream for me.
Yeah.
We can, we can torture ourselves and not be able to, rest in that perfect thing that God is bringing about in our lives,
Yeah.
So it can be either way. It can be sometimes we pray for a long time, God does that thing. Sometimes he's doing something else, but it's still, you can't, I think you can't tell that story without, Lord, please do what you know is best,
Yeah.
Your will, not mine.
Right. And we can't see the big picture like God does. So that's a major problem for us.
Yeah.
Well, moving ahead, can you talk about your latest release, the Hymns EP from 2014?
Yes. I had been wanting to do something for a while with hymns because, and I feel that there has been and is being a resurgence in hymns. A lot of artists are recording hymns, in a variety of ways. Some, putting them in settings that are pretty new, some sort of sticking a little closer to the original, some doing a combination. I love all of that. But what I started to be a little concerned about for a while there, when, you would see what was happening in worship, in church services, and just, in the small and in the large context, I started worrying that the next generation, we're going to lose the hymns. I was like, Lord, are we going to be the generation that loses the hymns?
Yeah.
It doesn't pass them down. And so I just thought, oh, I just want to do my little part. Steve Green and I were invited to do a tour together, which we did for a while. He had just released an entire hymns album, which is wonderful. And so I hadn't done anything yet, so I quickly put together this little EP, and, maybe at some point we'll do more. And I've done a few hymns here and there on other projects and on special group projects and all that. But anyway, these were just three of my favorites, and I did that sort of, on the occasion of that tour. And so I just, that was another thing that I enjoyed so much, was recording those songs, but and doing that tour as well. And one thing we would do every night in the second half of the evening is let people call out requests. And we happened to have an amazing piano player with us who pretty much knew anything they could call out. And sometimes they would stump us and we wouldn't know the song, and we'd have to get them to come up on stage and help. But I just, I love the fact, the main point of all of that is that these songs that contain so much truth, biblical truth, and are so powerful, I believe that, that they are staying with us. They're coming along with us.
Yeah.
I'm so encouraged by that.
And did you do this album as an independent artist?
I did. The last two or three things I've done have been as an independent artist. I was at a season in my life with being a mom, especially, and we homeschool.
Yeah.
That I just felt like, I've been blessed to work with just some wonderful record labels over the years. But there's sort of a higher level of, necessary demands on your time.
Yeah.
And traveling. And not always feeling like you have a lot of choice just because of wanting to be responsible in that relationship. Not that anyone's being mean, And so I just really felt like, it's important to be able to take great big deep breath here in this season of life, and and to not feel that same level of schedule demands on the schedule. And it's interesting when I look back on sort of my life, and I remember a time early on, when sort of in that first few years of marriage, where you think, well, okay, we should be having children now, and kind of holding up a calendar to the Lord and saying, look here, my calendar's getting behind, hello,
Yeah.
And, it felt like God said to me, I have a calendar too, and it's bigger than yours, and no, I'm not behind, but thank you. I'm on it, But I looked back years later, and I thought, what ended up happening is there was this whole season of, 20-something years where I was completely free to just go anywhere, anytime, just hit it hard, just kind of do whatever came up.
Yeah.
And not worry about, what if I'd had a child or two or three, and I was always thinking, being sort of torn between the responsibilities of being a mom and the responsibilities of, ministry. And it was almost like in my particular case, the Lord just sort of gave me these two seasons. And yes, they overlap, and I still go out and do concerts from time to time, and, but the recording is kind of, there's more space between recordings, there's more space between travel, and it just feels like things are in the right, the priorities are as they should be, and I'm not having to feel torn. So I sort of did these things, in, one season sort of morphed into another one, and it's been, for me, especially given my personality, the way I kind of tend to like to attack something, full on, one thing at a time. I've learned to multitask. Moms just have to.
Yeah.
But it's never been a great gift of mine, and still is not, I'm still not a great multitasker. So I think in my case, it was just good, that I was able to sort of focus on the music and now focus on being a homeschool mom, primarily.
Yeah. So what's on the horizon for you in 2017 and beyond?
You know what? I pretty much I don't have real specific plans except, we're on summer break now and we're heading into another year of high school.
Yeah.
And, parents tell you this and you don't quite believe it when they're 3, but you're just as busy when they're older. It's just different stuff,
Yeah.
So, as far as, at some point, will I be doing more with music again, and what form will that take, or will it stay pretty much at the level where it is now? I don't really know. And I kind of decided a long time ago, because I also used to be one of those people who would like to have a blueprint of my whole life and,
Oh, yeah.
get the Lord to sign off on it, and now I know it's coming. What am I doing in 20 years? Oh, let's see. Yes, here's what I'm doing in 20 years. And now I'm just, more and more just, gotten to be at peace with, I don't know, the Lord will show us what the next step is, and we'll just follow him in that. And sometimes, 2 or 3 steps down the line, but all you really need to know is the next thing.
Yeah.
When it's time to do it. And he'll make the way to do it. So I really don't mean to sound, like not really answering the question. That's just really the way I believe God's been teaching me, because it went against my, went against type for me, and he's been teaching me that over a lot of years.
Oh, yeah.
And I think more and more, I'm at peace with not knowing exactly what's coming, And,
Yeah, that's great.
so that's where we are. I know, as far as I know, we'll be homeschooling next year. That's kind of all I know.
Yeah, we homeschool our 2 boys also, my wife and I. So
yeah, it's a great blessing for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so what advice would you give those pursuing a ministry or career in Christian music in the 21st century?
Yeah, so I don't really have much practical or logistical advice, because things are so different, when it comes to those things. You know what I'm saying? Because, careers can happen in sort of what has seemed like a sort of inverted, backwards way from when I started out, But I do think in terms of the heart of what is Christian music and ministry, of course, that doesn't change, and because at the end of the day, it's just about ministry and what is God calling me to do.
Yeah.
And so really the same advice that I've always given, is if you feel like that's something that's in your heart that the Lord might be calling you to do, you want to definitely be, open hands, laying that at his feet, very open to, if you want me to use this gift of music, for you, for your glory, what's that going to look like? Is that about leading worship in my church at home? Is that about writing songs, recording? Is it about, leaving home and being gone for months out of the year and traveling,
Yeah.
And not that you have to know that whole picture up front, but just, in other words, it can take a lot of forms. And so, just because God has given us a gift of music doesn't, we don't necessarily know what form that's going to take. And so,
Yeah.
We have to let him direct that. And I really advise people to be praying with whoever their spiritual authority is. If you have godly parents, your pastor, whoever those people would be in your life that God gives, who love you and have more experience, and that God gives wisdom to speak into your life, and who can help to confirm what you believe God is guiding you to do, And then, if you really believe, yes, this is confirmed, I'm supposed to step out and see where the Lord takes this, then I've heard a lot of people's stories over the years. I've heard the stories of a lot of other Christian artists, how they got started.
Yeah.
they're all very different. And even people who sort of are in the same time, you know, who are contemporaries, their stories are still very different. And what dawned on me one day after hearing all these stories, I thought the stories are completely different, except they all have one thing in common. Every single one of them. And that is, they were all being faithful in the little things. When you hear their story, they were just being faithful to walk out what they felt God had called them to do, even if they were singing in a little coffee shop with 10 people listening, and they were mingling around, and maybe only 2 were actually listening, or, you know, all those places we've all been.
Oh, yeah.
You know, or as Amy Grant used to say, singing for the dogs on the back porch, or whatever, you know. They were being faithful in little things, and God began to open doors, you know, and give them responsibility over more things, and leading them into, you know, the place that he was calling them to fill, leading them on the journey, you know, that he started them on. And so that's I've said that, you know, one-on-one to a lot of young people, you know, after concerts over the years, is that's it, you know, pray, you know, and, you know, speak to those people who, you know, who can give you wisdom, and then be faithful in the little things, you know, and submit it to the Lord and see what he does.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying it isn't okay to knock on doors, but I will say that more doors have opened for me over the years that I wasn't knocking on than doors that I was pushing hard on.
Yeah.
You know, I have a tendency to push hard on doors that don't open, and then to sort of fall through one of those hidden doors that, you know, that you couldn't even see
Yeah.
as the Lord opened it. So I think you know what I'm saying, that sure, we want to be diligent, but there's something about being content and at peace with where God has me now, and also knowing that God never wastes his time or mine. And whatever he's got me doing at this moment, not only is it important for his kingdom in itself, but it's also building in me the preparation that I need for the next phase, for the next thing he's leading me to.
Yeah, and that's encouraging to me personally as a Christian artist, just hearing that.
Yeah, as you look back, you probably can already see that in your life, but as you look back on some of those times when you were frustrated and feeling like, I can't wait to get to what God has for me, you look back and you think, oh my goodness, look what he was doing right then when I was feeling frustrated.
Yeah.
That I draw on now. And I'm glad I have that, you know, so yeah, that's a good thing to remember for all of us, no matter what season we're in. So
anything else? Is there anything else you'd like to share or talk about?
I don't think so. I think you've asked such good questions, and of course I tend to, Stephen Curtis Chapman and I used to laugh about that, and actually I think others laughed about it. You know, you can ask one question and we'll talk for 20 minutes, so. Sorry about that. But anyway, no, I think you've given me a chance to sort of talk about anything that I would have, you know, and made me think of some things I wouldn't have thought of, so. And thank you very much. I enjoyed it. The best interviews, I've always said, are like conversations. And, and I enjoyed it too. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. God bless you.
Bye-bye.